It was a quiet, fog-covered day, one crept by the rot of autumn, one from an age past, one forgotten, one where mankind was but another species, not dominant, where beasts lurked in every light of day, not scattered and burnt into mere shadows, where men were barely scraping by from each threat of death. The Middle Ages, noxious diseases, ravenous animals, and destructive warfare were all common fates that ravaged the course of man's collective machine. Yet war dominated the others in scope. War seemed to have a stronghold on all, especially for those of religion. Of all the things men went to war over, the call of God was most faithful to attract them. Yet what did their religion bring? Horror, authority, guilt. To Alban, it was all it brought. In fact, it was why he avoided such things. He found himself far from his religious homeland. The Holy Roman Empire is what people called it. Men would rave of its greatness, preach of its beauty, its glory. Yet Alban didn't care for it. Instead, he rode on horseback right then, following the men of his mercenary band. He wasn't an ornate man. He wore simple chainmail, covered by broader plates of armor. A sheathed blade at his side, with a shield displaying a woman, a sword plunged through her abdomen and poking through her back. Alban looked ahead, seeing the backs of his fellow mercenaries and their horses. He grunted in a sort of quiet frustration. He'd been traveling for a week straight per the orders of their captain, Finn. He'd told them of a small town located near the border between Franks and the Holy Roman Empire. Supposedly, the people were all of noble blood and may pay a pretty price for work. Where their captain had heard this info was up for debate. Either he'd heard it uttered by a drunken breath of a merchant, the shady lips of a vagabond, or the weak words of an opportunist bandit masquerading as a feeble man. Either way, Alban couldn't help but feel a silent anger. "It'll be worth it," he told himself. "We'll get enough money to drink for weeks, enough to court women for a night's rest, enough to maybe leave this life for another." But then again, this word was of high debate to himself. He wasn't even sure if some of those things were what he wanted. Maybe they were. Maybe he'd convince himself it was eventually. His thoughts came to a standstill, however, as he watched Finn raise a hand, a motion to stop. He took the reins of his horse and felt himself come to a standstill. He looked forward with the group, waiting to see what the issue was. It wasn't long before Finn bellowed out, "Hold thy reins, men. There's a blockage on the road. Up ahead!" Alban turned, kicked his feet to his right and hopped off his horse saddle. He walked forward, attempting to come and see what the cause of the stop was. Great, he thought. Just a fallen oak or branch. The exhaustion and selfish desire within his soul made him seethe silently as he came upon the sight of his captain and the rest of his company. Most of them looked the same, clad in the same conforming armor and mail, carrying shields with their crest upon their backs. All except for Finn. He was clad in an ornate plate with gold trimmings. A fanciful helmet was placed upon his head, one that displayed the face of a stag on the visor. He had a sheathed blade at his side and a decorated shield upon his back. He looked to his men and pointed at the object blocking their path. It made Alban freeze up a bit. It was no tree. In fact, it was too stony to even be considered one. It was what looked like an obelisk, one the size of a large carriage made of grey stone, that now laid split across their path like a bisected carcass from its lower half. "What could have done that, Captain?" a scrawny man, Augustus asked.
A large beast, no less,
Finn responded.
I say we try to move it. With our combined force, it'd be no different from a pebble.
I'm not sure, Captain, said Bjorn, a large man with enough muscle to crack a skull. Looks a little too big.
Oh, now, Bjorn, don't feel discouraged. Have a little faith. If we push enough, it'll be but a mere intrusion.
And if we can't? Albin asked.
Well, we'll course correct. Just head down east of here. Surely we'll find our salvation. Another path, perhaps.
Albin looked a bit closer at the obelisk. It was fairly aged. Cracks strewn the length of its body, and Mother Earth seemed to be claiming it once again.
That's odd,
Albin said. He nudged Augustus's shoulder.
What?
He asked.
See around the obelisk? Looks aged, doesn't it?
Augustus kneeled down and took a close look, motioning for the rest of the group to do the same. It was the fifth man amongst them to speak first, Gunther, a man who could drink a keg of alcohol like it was nothing.
He's right, Captain. Looks old. You sure this isn't some sort of setup?
Finn narrowed his eyes and looked off into the distance, as if to think.
I'm most certain that merchant was telling the truth.
His voice was hesitant. Albin sighed. Finn was a trusting man. Too much of one, in fact. It made him susceptible to a lot of trickery. Such was the case for his noble blood.
And if he wasn't?
Augustus asked.
Even in myths there's an origin point, my friend. There has to be some sort of crumb of truth to it. A source to base off it, yes?
There was a palpable silence till Albin interjected. He's not wrong. There's more behind a mask of deceit, whether that be the bones of lies or the flesh of truth.
Whatever the case, we should tread carefully. Never know what will burst out this fog. Best not to gamble, Augustus said. I suppose you're right. Come, men, we'll make for the east,
said Finn. He walked back to his stallion, silently indicating for the others to do the same. Albin started to make his way back to his mount, but soon found himself walking near Augustus as he did so. So what do you think? He asked.
We're heading into another trap,
Augustus said flatly. And you'd know, you snake, Albin teased.
It's fairly common trickery to know. Stop a carriage or caravan in its tracks, loot and murder them, maybe take or eat the horse, steal the jewels and supplies under rotting noses. Where was that last night during cards? I thought you always pulled something. Maybe I did. You just didn't see it.
A sly grin spread across Augustus's face, and Albin couldn't help but chuckle a bit. Let's just hope we can finally stop. I'm sick of horseback.
Depends. If this goes where I think it will, we're likely to be gutted and thieved. If not, we find a cushy brothel with rich men left and right to gamble with.
I suppose. Albin finally reached his horse and mounted himself upon its saddle, grabbing the reins and tugging on them. His horse began to move with the rest of the group and into the mist. It was a loud place, that church was. Men, women, and children congregated to serve the house of the Lord. Some locals, others faraway travelers in need of guidance. The church was one made of wood, most likely as a means of saving resources. Its spires stretched high into the Roman sky and pierced it like a blade. It was surrounded by a few homes and the dense woods. A young man looked onto the house of God that sat before him. He felt unworthy, as if he'd be a heretic to even try and step in it. The burning pain on his back had yet to cease, and he gritted his teeth. It was a reminder of his sin. If it was just the state the wild had left him in, it would be unwarranted. The bruises, cuts, and cracked whips were all undeserved. Yet it was that pain that made it all seem deserved.
Just try, he thought to himself. No one knows you're here. It's a fresh start, a fresh congregation.
He let the words echo throughout his skull, bouncing back and forth. He sucked in a bit of breath and braced himself, walking forward toward the congregation. He felt the grass between his toes. How cold it was on this day. With each step, he felt his heart beating faster and faster.
I'm unworthy, he thought. A heretic swathed in desire.
He pushed down his fear, trekking his way toward the door where the priest stood.
A snake amongst the gardens of his children.
The priest's face at first was one of welcoming, then of concern. The man froze up, unable to move. He couldn't do it. It was too much.
Art thou all right? Thy complexion is pale.
The priest's voice was soft. The man looked at him.
Yes. I'm sorry, it's just been a long time since I've stepped within such grounds.
The priest cocked his head at the man and stretched out a hand to him.
Come, dear brother. The Father shall forgive thy transgression. He is merciful, as am I.
The man looked at his hand and up at him. He took a deep breath and took it.
Call me Father Ab, the priest said. And thy name?
The man bit his lips, so hard he could taste blood on their cragged surface.
Just call me sir,
he said. Father Ab nodded, and with the man's hand, led him into the chapel, a thing he had not seen since his exile. They made camp by the time night had begun to set in. The sky shined with a million eyes that darted about and watched the group as they gave rest for the night. Alban stared up at them, looking to them for guidance in a way. He always found himself thinking they were the million eyes of God that watched humanity's every move, judging their actions and how they went about their lives. He wondered if God approved of him and his life up to this moment. He looked from the sky to the rest of the group, all of them, including their mounts, around a central light of warmth and refuge within the ever-present dark. The mares stood about, drinking from a bucket that Gunther had filled with water for them, a request met with a bit of grumbling from the man, for he was far from his kind of drunk. As for the seating, it was cut down by courtesy of Bjorn. The wisps of flame danced about the air, sending a faint yet noticeable scent of burning that both warmed and scorched Alban's lungs. It gave him comfort, yet it bit like a snake within Eden. Finn and Bjorn sat about together, talking and joking as they peeled about their rations, roasting them over the open flame. It filled the air with a fine scent of slow-burning rabbits and various birds they'd shot out of the sky. It tantalized Alban's lips, yet he didn't take it. He couldn't. He may have been one of them, yet he felt as if a fifth horseman alongside four. Then there was Gunther. He sat, staring into the acrid flames of the campfire, seemingly displeased and bored. He could tell why in a sort of way. After all, he craved the sweet taste of warm foam off the brim of a mug. But he'd see flashes about his expression, ones he couldn't discern. Possibly hurt, maybe anguish. In a way he could relate, yet he dared not divulge such things. It hurt too much to do so, and with a million eyes in the sky, he bit his tongue. I deserved it, he thought to himself. Then he turned to Augustus. He sat near Alban, seemingly in his own world, sketching with a small book that Alban had never seen the contents of. He had a vial of ink at his side with a quill Alban assumed he journaled with. Yet he wondered what was there to even catalogue. Thieving? He smiled a bit at that, yet hid it out of fear of seeming strange. In a way, he felt he did it so as to not embarrass himself in front of such a companion. He considered his word of value, and his looks. Oh, his looks. He stopped with those thoughts, and looked toward the sky. He would not give in to such a sin. Not again. Not under the eyes of God. Not under his gaze. So he resigned himself to mundanity, not giving in to conversation, only giving responses and comments, when Bjorn and Finn's stories extended outside their one-on-one nature. Yet he felt watched as he sat, not by God, not by his gaze, nay. He turned his attention from the group and the flame they gathered about, and looked out into the nocturnal gloom. Within it, he could have sworn he saw a shape moving about, seemingly scuttling from tree to examine the crowd. A beast. He turned to the group. "I just saw something out in the dark," Albin said. The group turned their attention to him, in a sort of collective silence. His comment was blunt, matter-of-fact, without any sort of question. Bjorn then stood and grabbed his sheathed blade. "Where?" Albin pointed out to where he'd looked before. Out toward a distant tree line, yet it had gone from view. Bjorn looked out, trying to cut his gaze through the dark to possibly see just a flicker. Anything. But there was nothing.
Must have been a trick of the eyes,"
Bjorn said.
"I appreciate the caution, holy man."
"Thanks," Albin mumbled. Yet as he looked back, that figure appeared again. He couldn't bring himself to say anything again. It'd only end up disappearing. So he resigned himself to the group as Gunther began to speak.
"You know, I've heard tales of monsters within the dark at brothels and taverns. Lots of variation at them places, let me tell you,"
Gunther said.
"A lot of them are true,"
Bjorn said coldly.
"I'd say some are. Others sound like donkey shit to me. Please, I'd no drunkard. In fact, a lot of beasts lurk just out of view. Just out of sight enough as to not draw attention from prey. And enlighten me, brute."
Gunther crossed his arms and gave an exaggerated huff of air that made Finn chuckle.
"I know many. One I can regale you with is Draugr." "What?"
Gunther looked confused.
"Draugr. They're men with a good soul behind their sockets. They lurk about in torn clothing or naked, their bodies rotted and fly meal for any preying insects that dare to infest their many wounds. They can do a lot of things. Sometimes they're meant to guard sacred tombs, ones full of gold and treasures."
Augustus perked up at that.
"Other times they stalk about as vengeful things of wrath and death, brutally gutting and killing anything they see. They can even drive animals insane, turn the most tamed horses wild and frightened, turn docile hogs into gluttonous beasts of wrath and greed, and turn birds into small worms that gut and feed on the entrails of smaller beasts, even peck the eyes out of most skilled warriors. Really, they aren't to be taken lightly. They are powerful things of undeath. The only way you can kill it is to destroy the body. Dismemberment by itself won't work. The limbs will drag themselves back to each other and get minds of their own. I've heard the head is an optimal solution, but I've yet to see such proof. But what I know is definitive."
He gave a pause for effect.
"The only way to kill them is to dismember and burn them before they can even possibly try to reassemble themselves and reanimate. They are nasty, wretched things of the Nordic lands I inhabit, and I doubt such is limited merely to there."
The group was silent. Gunther sat in shock at such a detailed recount. "So you think there was one stalking us from the tree line?" Augustus asked, seemingly a bit skeptical,
No, I do feel such danger should never be considered absolute, however. Many beasts lurk about the entirety of Midgard, whispered about by many, and told under the firelight and company of others. A constant state of caution should be taken, even in safe havens, for that's where the worst incidents happen.
Have you seen one? Albin asked, his words shaken.
Oh, I have. When I served as a mercenary back home, I had to plunder a tomb with my group at the time. Only I made it out.
He said the last part with a tinge of guilt. Everybody felt a sort of sympathy for Bjorn at that declaration, yet no one spoke, not even Finn, seemingly too shocked from the recounting. They were like that for a while before everyone seemingly returned to their usual business. Yet Albin still felt as if he was being watched, by God's million eyes, and by something else's eyes. They left at dawn, mounting their horses in no sort of hurry, ready to continue another day's travel. But they travelled long. In fact, it was maybe an hour of it before Gunther, who saw something in the distance.
Oi lads, I think I see a town up here.
Are you sure you're sober? Augustus yelled back.
I am, you stupid ass.
A wave of laughter roared across the group. Finally, Albin thought to himself. He watched as the town began to fade in from the fog. Slowly, it seemed to disperse, as if to welcome them. Albin looked around and felt his eyes widen. The merchant knew what he was talking about. There were large houses fit for noble blood, elaborately decorated and kept well, colored and vibrant, elaborately painted by the handiwork of a painter. Pompous men and women walked down polished cobble streets waving to one another, all of which dressed in the finest of linens and wool, strangely colored compared to the dryness of the group's armor. Yet this all came to a screeching halt when he heard a familiar sound. Ding dong, ding dong, ding dong. A bell. Each ring sent a shiver throughout his entire body. He looked out into the distance, knowing what awaited him. A large church stood ever present amongst the shops, homes, and fog. So large it could see everyone and everything, including Albin. It saw through him, his being, his presence. It smelled the sin on his skin and the cinders of hellfire about his form. He shook his head, trying to ignore the prying feeling it gave him. He wasn't in the mood to relive what had occurred before, what drove him to his current living situation. He buried it within himself, attempting to drive it so deep in his soul it wouldn't bother him the whole time they were here. Yet he couldn't help but feel its fangs gnawing about his essence. The group stopped their horses, Finn looking for a spot to place them. He dismounted his horse and looked about till he saw a crowded building up ahead.
Bjorn, could you join me in examining this place?
Bjorn grunted in acceptance and dismounted his horse. Men and women still passed by what members of the group stayed behind. Some gave confused looks. Others scowled.
Seems a little tight here, don't it?
Gunther asked. It's a place of nobles, Gunther. Of course it is. We're flea-ridden hounds in the dens of golden felines, Albin said.
Don't they know we do work for 'em? What's the matter if we rough up a few brothels and drink 'em dry? We're dirty by our position. Best they get used to it.
Well, nobles don't exactly take kindly to the poorer members of society, Augustus interjected, especially around places like these. People around here are born nobles and knights, not dirt-encrusted mercenaries or disease-ridden barbarians. Even if we work for them, it doesn't cast around the inherent disdain they feel toward our kind.
I say they ought to get some better manners. What happened to being respectfully classy, eh? Isn't that what they preach at the dinner table?
It appears we aren't at a dinner table,
Augustus said.
No, in fact, we are on smelly manners. A great observation as usual, Augustus.
And you call me an arse? The three chuckled at that. Alban couldn't help but feel a sort of warmth during moments like this, when the group and himself were enjoying one another's company in the moment, forsaking their surroundings and judging eyes, especially around Augustus. His presence made him want to melt in joy and euphoria, yet he found himself cursing at such a thought.
No, damn it, he thought. That's not how I should feel. He's a sinful man, not a fair woman.
It made his sense of joy dissipate like a puff of smoke, never to be seen again. Such feelings were the reason he was here, and the reason his back still seemed to sting. Yet he found his attention refocused when Finn hollered out,
Men, I found a stable for the horses. Go on and get them locked up for the night.
He watched as Gunther and Augustus proceeded forward. He felt his gaze linger the slightest bit on his friend.
If only I could, he thought. If only I could.
He shook his head and tugged at his horse's reins to move forward. All the while that church stared ever present, its watchful eye upon his form, for it saw his sins. A quiet set of adolescent children stood, singing a hymn of golden notes, blessed notes. The man sat in a pew next to a set of people who seemed to scoot away from his form. He hung his head low, holding his head in his hands, trying to take some sort of solace in this place. Yet how could he? He'd been cast out before, and surely he deserved it again. How could he sit in the house of God with such penance spread across his back, paining him to sit straight? Then a sight caught his attention. From the corner of his eyes was Father Ab. He looked up from his cracked, dirt-stained hands and could see his form behind the lectern. Clad in robes sewn by holy hands, passed from preacher to preacher, pastor to pastor, priest to priest. A mark of a disciple. A mark of one blessed to spread God's word to all. His holy essence seemed to illuminate the chapel as he began to preach.
Guilt. Within ourselves we find guilt.
No one spoke. It was dead silent within the chapel. Not a sound rang out.
We as a collective have felt guilt since the days of our fathers' fathers, our mothers' mothers, all because of sin.
That word rang throughout the man's head, reverberating from side to side within his skull as he processed that one singular term. It was like a ball of blades perpetually bouncing about, and it made his back sting more. He gritted his teeth.
But I ask of thou this, are we truly doing this out of malpractice? Do we practice such sin with malevolence, or is it accidental, caused by our nature to commit such acts? Eve did not know of sin till she committed its first act. She lived in ignorance before she ate of the tree of knowledge. She lived in bliss. In a way, we carry that ourselves. We do sin every day, whether we know it or not. We sin because it's in our blood. To harbor such guilt over what is natural is something we all have struggled with. I know for a select few it has had lasting effects upon thy soul and thy mind. Yet we all know it can be forgiven. Unless it is of blasphemy, anything can be forgiven, for it is in our nature. The Lord is merciful. He is kind, and he loves us as his children. All thou needst to do is ask him for forgiveness, and I am sure thou wilt find it. I'm here to conduct such a thing. Through me the Lord can do such acts, for thou all can be and will be forgiven."
The man stared at Ab as he spoke, hanging on every word. Was he right? Could his desire be forgiven? But what of those who had been made an example in his homeland? Those burned on pyres of flame and branded for exile like him? Could they be forgiven? Would they be forgiven? He shook his head as the priest sat down and opened a book of hymns for him and all to sing along.